will follow a pretty distinct path today. 1. The zealot spear. 2. Rabbinic doubts and soulmates. 3. The daughters demand justice. 4. Transferring the mantle. And 5. The sacrificial blueprint.
All right, let's start with part 1, the zealot spear.
This portion kicks off with a completely shocking act. Picture this. During a devastating plague, an Israelite prince named Zimri and a Midianite princess, Cosbi, are having a very public, illicit liaison. Pinchas sees this, grabs a spear, and literally impales them both. Now, the biblical text actually praises his initiative. God stops the plague and grants Pinchas a covenant of peace and an eternal priesthood. But, and this is a big but, the later Talmudic sources, they show some severe ambivalence toward this extreme act of vigilante justice.
You see, the rabbis were clearly terrified of the precedent this could set. In the Talmud, specifically Tractate Sanhedrin 72a, they put some heavy restrictions on this kind of extra-legal action. They declare it's only permissible in flagrante delicto, which literally means while the fire is blazing or at the exact precise moment the sin is occurring. Get this, if Zimri had stopped for even a single second before Pinchas struck, Pinchas would have been guilty of outright murder. Oh, and the ultimate legal irony? If Zimri had turned around and killed Pinchas in self-defense, Zimri would have been legally justified.
So this brilliantly illustrates the tension we're talking about. On one hand, the biblical text is lauding the zealot for his quick, passionate defense of God's honor. On the other hand, the Talmud zeroes in on the complete lack of due process. In fact, the Talmud notes that if Pinchas had paused his whole zealotry mission to just ask the courts for permission, they would have explicitly prohibited the killing and given him a firm lesson on the proper rule of law.
This rabbinic discomfort goes incredibly deep. One tradition even suggests that Moses himself was actually ready to excommunicate Pinchas for his totally rogue behavior, that is, until God stepped in with that covenant of peace. And it's also worth pointing out that rabbinic tradition often identifies Pinchas with the prophet Elijah, the ultimate zealous outsider who always operates way beyond the bounds of normal institutions.
Which brings us right into part 2, rabbinic doubts and soulmates.
Now, for the most radical rereading of this whole violent event, we have to look to a 19th century Hasidic thinker known as the Ishbitzer. He suggests that Zimri wasn't just some simple wicked rebel. Not at all. He paints Zimri as a tragic, deeply spiritual guy who fought his way through 10 grueling levels of internal struggle against his own passions. According to the Ishbitzer, Zimri resisted and resisted until he reached this final shocking realization that his overpowering urge wasn't a sin at all, but was actually a manifestation of divine will.
Talk about a massive narrative twist. The Ishbitzer is suggesting that Zimri and Cosbi were actually soulmates, destined for each other since the 6 days of creation. So in this view, Pinchas wasn't a hero. He was just a spiritually unsophisticated, true believer who simply couldn't grasp the complex cosmic connection between these two people. Pinchas just saw a broken rule. He couldn't see the divine mystery underneath it all.
So, moving from vigilante violence to cool, structured logic, we arrive at part 3, the daughters demand justice.
Enter the 5 daughters of Zelophehad: Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Their father had passed away, leaving no sons, so under the existing patriarchal laws, they were set to inherit absolutely nothing. But instead of grabbing spears, they grabbed legal arguments. They successfully challenged the inheritance laws, and the Talmud actually praises them as incredibly wise, righteous exegetes with just impeccable timing, bringing their case forward exactly as Moses was discussing how to apportion the land.
Now, Moses isn't quite sure how to handle this totally unprecedented legal challenge, so he brings their case directly to God. And God's response? Resounding. The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. The Midrashic text known as the Sifrei interprets this moment beautifully. It suggests that God basically checked his celestial, unabridged Torah up in the heavens and confirmed that the daughters' human, logical claim perfectly matched the ultimate heavenly law. They used the system to perfect the system.
Interestingly, while they're making their case, the daughters make a point to note that their father died for his own sin and wasn't part of any rebellion. Rabbi Akida famously identifies Zelophehad as the woodgatherer, a guy who was executed earlier in the Torah for violating the Sabbath. Others suggest he might have been among the Ma'apalim, those who tried to invade the land prematurely. Either way, they don't hide their family's past. They just use the cold, hard facts of the case to establish their precise legal standing.
But hey, the rule of law is rarely simple, right? While the daughters won a massive victory for inheritance rights, civil law eventually required a bit of a compromise. To make sure the economic structure and the territorial boundaries of the tribes remain intact, a stipulation was added. They had to marry within their own tribe. It's a powerful reminder that unlike the chaotic, swift strike of a zealot spear, a functioning society requires negotiation, balance, and, sometimes painful compromises.
And a society meant to endure absolutely requires structured, reliable leadership. Which brings us to part 4, transferring the mantle.
Moses knows his time is coming to an end, so he asks God to appoint a successor. Now notice who God doesn't pick. He doesn't pick Pinchas, the fiery zealot who literally just saved the camp. Instead, God selects Joshua. Joshua is defined not by impulsive, violent action, but by 40 years of faithful, steady, quiet service. He was the guy who spent 40 years never stirring from the tent of meeting.
Moses is commanded to formally lay his hands upon Joshua, publicly and legally investing him with authority right in front of the community. Interestingly, the Midrash notes that during Moses' lifetime, Israel wasn't handed over to any patron or angel, but with his death, oversight of Israel was restored to the celestial princes whom Joshua later encounters. This ensures the Israelites will be led forward by due process, established precedent, and structured succession, firmly slamming the door on the era of charismatic vigilantism.
And this deep desire for ultimate structure culminates in our final section, Part 5, the sacrificial blueprint. Right here in Numbers 28 and 29, we find the most detailed blueprint in the entire Torah for communal offerings. Notice how it literally maps out the rhythm of time itself. It establishes the tamid, those unwavering daily offerings, and the musaf, the additional offerings for the Sabbath, new moons, and all the festivals. It is the absolute ultimate expression of predictable legislated routine.
The rabbis deeply loved this structure. In fact, rabbinic sources link the strict, unwavering adherence to this specific sacrificial calendar to 10 continuous miracles that occurred in the temple. We're talking things like the rain never once extinguishing the fire on the outdoor altar pyre, or that no disqualification was ever found in the Omer or the 2 loaves offerings. Structure, in their eyes, literally invited the miraculous right into everyday life.
The Midrash actually makes a stunning connection here. It suggests that the immense, highly structured generosity required to maintain this unending calendar of sacrifices was intended to formally atone for the chaotic, impulsive, and lawless creation of the golden calf. So, the antidote to chaotic passion, it seems, is relentless, structured devotion.
On one end, you have the fiery, uncompromising zeal of a Pinchas, someone willing to bypass all the rules for what he believes is right. On the other end, the deliberate, negotiated, highly regulated due process championed by the daughters of Zelophehad and the daily sacrificial calendar.